The massive transport ship called Stellar Harmony was shaking like a toy in the hands of an angry child. Taemin gripped his seat as the metal walls around him groaned and twisted. The ship was falling through the atmosphere of a planet that looked like a giant ball of red sand from space, but now it felt like they were diving straight into hell. Taemin was the only human on this ship. The other 7 crew members were aliens from different worlds. Captain Veltar was tall and blue with skin that looked like smooth metal. His 3 friends were also Altarians, and they all thought they were the smartest beings in the galaxy. Then there were 2 bug-like creatures called Zephyrians named Kixlock and Hivenow who made clicking sounds. When they talked, the strangest one was Gemstone, who looked like a walking crystal that sparkled in the light. All around him, the aliens were panicking in their own ways. The Altarians were pressing buttons on their advanced computers trying to fix the engines. The Zephyrians were buzzing loudly and running around checking different systems. Gemstone was flashing different colors like a broken light. The ship kept falling, and everyone knew they were going to crash. Taemin looked down at the old canvas bag between his feet while everyone else was freaking out. He was thinking about what was inside that bag. The other crew members always made fun of what he carried. They called it junk and garbage and primitive trash, but Taemin knew better. His grandmother had taught him that the simplest things were often the most useful inside. The bag were things he had collected from different planets over the years. There were plastic containers from food packages, metal wire from old machines, rubber tubes from broken equipment, glass bottles that once held drinks, aluminum foil from meal wraps, small tools that other people threw away when the other crew members saw him picking up these things. They would laugh and shake their heads. Captain Veltar had once said to him, "Human, your species is so backward. You collect garbage while we create technology that can move stars." Taemin never argued back. He just smiled and kept collecting things that might be useful someday. His grandmother used to say, "You never know when simple things will save your life." The ship hit the ground with a sound like thunder mixed with breaking glass. Taemin was thrown forward, but his safety belt kept him in his seat. Metal pieces flew everywhere, and sparks shot from broken wires. The lights went out for a moment, then came back on, but they were dim and flickering. Everyone was quiet for a few seconds, just happy to be alive. Then the reality of their situation hit them. The ship was broken. The engines were dead. The communication system was not working. They were stuck on a desert planet with no way to call for help. Taemin looked out through a cracked window and saw nothing but red sand stretching to the horizon. The 2 suns in the sky were blazing hot, and there was no sign of water anywhere. Captain Veltar stood up and brushed dust off his blue uniform. His 3 Altarian friends gathered around him. They started talking in their language, which sounded like music, but angry music. The Zephyrians were checking their equipment and making worried clicking sounds. Gemstone was flashing red, which Taemin had learned meant he was upset. "We need to assess the damage," Captain Veltar announced. His voice was still strong and commanding, even though his ship was crashed. "First, we check our water supplies. Then we try to fix the quantum water recycling system. Without water, we will not survive 3 days in this heat." Taemin quietly picked up his bag and moved to a corner of the broken ship. He started taking things out and looking at them carefully. A plastic food container that once held noodles, a piece of clear plastic wrap, a metal cup from his lunch kit, some rubber tubing, a small knife wire from an old radio. The other crew members were too busy with their own problems to notice what he was doing. The Altarians had opened up their main computer and were looking at screens full of numbers and symbols. Their quantum water maker was a machine the size of a refrigerator that could supposedly turn any liquid into pure drinking water, but when they tried to turn it on, nothing happened. The crash had broken something important inside it. The Zephyrians had their own water recycling system that used tiny robots to clean dirty water, but their robots needed a special power source that had been damaged in the crash. They were buzzing angrily as they tried to fix the power unit with their advanced tools. Gemstone could actually absorb moisture from the air and turn it into water inside his crystal body, but this planet was so dry that there was almost no moisture to absorb. He was flashing different colors as he tried to pull water from the desert air, but it was not working. Meanwhile, Taemin was arranging his simple materials in different ways. He was thinking about a lesson his grandmother had taught him when he was 7 years old. She had shown him how people in the old days made water from seawater using nothing but the Sun and simple materials. Back then Earth had gone through terrible wars over water, and people had to be very clever to survive. His grandmother had been a refugee during those water wars. She had learned survival tricks from her own grandmother, who had lived through even worse times. She taught Taemin that when all the fancy technology breaks down, you need to go back to the basics. The sun always shines, water always evaporates. When it gets hot, steam always turns back into water. When it cools down, these were laws of nature that never changed no matter how advanced your civilization became. The other crew members were getting more frustrated as their equipment continued to fail. The Altarians had taken apart half their computer, but could not find the problem. The Zephyrians had burned out 3 power units trying to restart their water robots. Gemstone had given up trying to pull moisture from the air, and was now flashing a dim blue color that meant he was tired. Captain Veltar walked over to where Temin was sitting with his materials spread out around him. "What are you doing, human? We have real work to do, and you are playing with garbage." His voice was sharp and angry. The stress of the situation was making him even more arrogant than usual. Taemin looked up at the tall blue alien and smiled. "I am working on a solution, Captain. Just because something looks simple does not mean it cannot save our lives." The other aliens heard this and started laughing. Kixlock buzzed loudly. "The human thinks his primitive materials can do what our advanced technology cannot do. How amusing." Hive now clicked his agreement. Gemstone flashed yellow, which meant he thought something was funny, but Taemin kept working. He had an idea forming in his mind. It was based on something very old and very simple, but he knew it could work. He just needed to put the pieces together in the right way. The aliens could laugh all they wanted, but when their fancy machines failed, maybe they would be glad that someone remembered the old ways. The desert wind howled outside the broken ship, carrying sand that made scratching sounds against the metal walls. The temperature was rising as the twin suns climbed higher in the sky. Soon it would be too hot to work outside. They needed water, and they needed it soon, or they would all die in this endless sea of red sand. Taemin smiled as he picked up the plastic noodle container and held it up to the light. This simple piece of trash just might save all their lives. The second day on the desert planet started with bad news. The ship computer announced that they had used half their water supply already. Captain Veltar gathered everyone for a meeting. His blue skin looked darker than yesterday, and there were lines of worry around his eyes. "We must ration our remaining water," he said. "Each person gets only 2 cups per day until we can repair the quantum water generator." The Altarians nodded seriously, but Taemin could see they were scared. Their advanced machine was still broken, and they had no idea how to fix it. The temperature outside was already climbing toward 50 degrees, and it was only morning. The metal walls of the ship were getting hot to touch. Taemin wiped sweat from his forehead as he continued working with his simple materials. He had spread everything out on a piece of cloth and was arranging them in different patterns. "Look at the human playing with his toys," said Kixlock to his friend Hive. "Now we are dying, and he builds things from garbage." The 2 Zephyrians clicked their mandibles together, and what passed for laughter among their species. Their own water recycling robots were still broken, and they had given up trying to fix them. Taemin ignored their comments. He was focused on remembering exactly how his grandmother had shown him to build a solar still. She had used an old metal pot, a piece of glass, and some rocks, but he would have to adapt the design with what he had. The principle was the same, though, and principles never changed. The Altarians were becoming more desperate as the day went on. They had connected 3 different diagnostic computers to their quantum water maker, but none could identify the problem. Their technology was so advanced that when it broke, only other advanced technology could understand what was wrong, but all their backup systems had been damaged in the crash. Captain Veltar was getting angry. He kept pacing around the ship and muttering in his musical language. Sometimes he would stop and stare at the broken equipment, then start pacing again. His 3 friends tried to calm him, but they were just as worried. The desert heat was affecting all of them, and dehydration was making them irritable. By midday, the ship felt like an oven. Everyone was sweating and breathing hard. The aliens had never experienced this kind of heat before. Their homeworlds had climate control systems that kept everything comfortable. Taemin came from Earth, where his ancestors had survived ice ages and heat waves and deserts without any technology. At Algamstone was having the worst time of all. The crystal being needed a lot of water to keep his body structure stable. As he got more dehydrated, his usually bright sparkles were becoming dim and his edges were starting to look rough. He tried absorbing moisture from their breath, but it was not nearly enough human. "What exactly are you trying to build?" Captain Veltar demanded. He stood over Taemin with his hands on his hips, looking down at the collection of plastic containers and metal pieces. "Do you think you can create miracles with garbage while our quantum processors cannot solve this problem?" Taemin looked up calmly. He had been working for hours and his simple device was starting to take shape. It looked like a large clear bowl with a smaller dark cup sitting in the middle. Clear plastic was stretched across the top and held in place with wire. A small weight in the center made the plastic sag down like a funnel pointing at the cup. "This is called a solar still," he said simply. "It uses the sun to turn dirty water into clean water. My grandmother taught me how to make one when I was a child. It does not need computers or quantum processors or power sources. It just needs heat and basic physics." The aliens looked at his contraption and started laughing again. This was the funniest thing they had heard since the crash, the idea that this primitive human could solve their water problem with plastic wrap and containers was ridiculous. Their species had mastered space travel and could manipulate matter at the atomic level, but this human thought simple materials could save them. "You have finally lost your mind," said Hive. "Now the stress of our situation has broken your brain. There is no way that collection of junk can produce clean water. The laws of physics do not work that way." But Taemin knew the laws of physics better than they realized. He had studied engineering at university. But more importantly, he had learned practical science from his grandmother. She had survived the water wars by understanding how heat and evaporation and condensation work together. She had taught him that the universe followed simple rules that never changed no matter how advanced technology became. As the afternoon wore on, the situation got more desperate. The aliens had given up trying to fix their equipment and were just sitting in whatever shade they could find. The ship was too hot to touch in most places, and the air shimmered with heat waves outside. Everyone was rationing their water carefully, but they all knew it would not last much longer. Captain Veltar tried to use the emergency radio to call for help, but the crash had damaged the antenna. They were completely cut off from the rest of the galaxy. The nearest space station was months away. Even if someone knew they were missing, their only hope was to somehow produce water on this barren planet. That evening, as the twin suns finally started to set, Taemin finished his solar still. He had sealed all the edges with melted plastic and positioned the collection cup perfectly in the center. The device looked simple, but he knew it was based on principles that had worked for thousands of years on dozens of different worlds. The aliens watched him carry his contraption outside and set it up in a spot that would get full sunlight in the morning. They shook their heads in disbelief. Captain Veltar muttered something about humans and their primitive superstitions. Gemstone flashed a dim orange color that meant he was feeling hopeless. That night, everyone tried to sleep, but it was difficult. The ship was still too hot, and they were all worried about the next day. They had enough water for maybe one more day. After that, they would start dying of dehydration. The desert night was cold, but inside the metal ship it was still uncomfortably warm. Taemin lay awake thinking about his grandmother. She had told him stories about the old days when people had to be clever to survive. She said that fancy technology was wonderful, but it could break down. Simple solutions lasted forever because they were based on the way the universe actually worked. Tomorrow he would find out if she was right. The solar still sat outside in the cold desert night, waiting for the morning sun. If it worked, the aliens would have to admit that sometimes the simplest solutions were the best ones. If it failed, they would all die together on this hostile world, but at least he would have tried to save them using the wisdom his grandmother had passed down to him. The stars were brilliant in the clear desert sky. Somewhere among them were the homeworlds of his alien crewmates, places with advanced technology and comfortable climates. But here on this forgotten planet under alien stars, it would be simple human knowledge that determined whether they lived or died. The third morning brought terror. With the sunrise, everyone knew this was their last day with water. Captain Veltar announced at dawn that they had less than 8 hours of drinking water left. After that, they would begin dying. The alien crew members looked at each other with fear in their eyes. The twin suns climbed higher, and the desert heat began building again. Taemin woke early and went outside to check his solar still. The device sat exactly where he had left it, but now he needed to add the most important ingredient, water itself. He carried his personal water bottle outside and carefully poured his entire daily ration into the bottom of the device. "What are you doing, human?" Captain Veltar shouted when he saw what was happening. "You are wasting our precious water on your ridiculous machine." The other aliens came running outside to see what the commotion was about. When they saw Taemin pouring clean drinking water into his contraption, they thought he had gone completely insane. "He has lost his mind completely," said Kixlock. "The stress has broken his brain, and now he is throwing away the water we need to survive." Hive now buzzed angrily in agreement. Gemstone flashed bright red, which meant he was furious. The crystal being was getting more desperate as his body started to show cracks from dehydration, but Taemin ignored their protests. He spread the water evenly across the dark bottom of his solar still, then stretched the clear plastic wrap tightly over the top. The plastic formed a perfect seal around the edges, and the small weight in the center created a cone shape that pointed down at the collection cup. He used wire to make sure everything stayed in place. The aliens watched in horrified fascination as Taemin positioned his device in the brightest spot he could find. The morning sun was already strong and getting stronger every minute. Within moments, the clear plastic began to fog up with condensation, but the aliens did not understand what they were seeing. Captain Veltar grabbed Taemin by the shoulder. "Human, you have doomed us all. That was drinking water, and you have wasted it on this primitive nonsense. We should have stopped you." His blue skin was pale and his hands were shaking slightly from dehydration and stress. "Wait," Taemin said calmly. "Watch what happens next. The sun will do the work now." He pointed to the device where tiny water droplets were already forming on the inside of the plastic wrap. The heat from the sun was causing the water at the bottom to evaporate, and the vapor was condensing on the cooler plastic surface above. The aliens stared at the device in confusion. They could see something happening, but they did not understand the process. Their advanced education had focused on quantum mechanics and exotic physics, but they had never learned about simple evaporation and condensation. These were basic principles that children learned on most worlds, but these aliens had grown up with technology that did everything for them. As the morning progressed, the sun grew hotter and the solar still began working more efficiently. The water at the bottom heated up and turned into invisible vapor that rose to the plastic cover. The vapor hit the cooler plastic and turned back into liquid water, which formed droplets that grew larger and larger. "Look," said Taemin, pointing to the largest droplet. It was hanging from the lowest point of the plastic cone directly over the collection cup. As they watched, the droplet grew heavy and fell with a tiny splash into the metal container. It was the first drop of clean water they had produced since the crash. "Impossible," whispered Captain Veltar. His scientific mind was struggling to understand how such a simple arrangement could work. The other aliens crowded around the device, watching in amazement as more droplets formed and fell. The process was slow, but it was definitely working. "How is this possible?" asked Gemstone. His crystal structure was flickering with confusion and wonder. "You put dirty water in and clean water comes out, but there are no processors, no filters, no energy source except the sun." Taemin smiled as he explained, "The sun heats the water and turns it into vapor. Water vapor is pure. Even if the original water was dirty, the vapor rises and hits the cool plastic where it turns back into liquid water. The liquid runs down to the lowest point and drips into the cup. It is the same process that makes rain in the sky." The aliens listened in stunned silence as Taemin described the water cycle that happened naturally on every planet with an atmosphere. They had learned about weather patterns in school, but they had never thought about using these natural processes to solve practical problems. Their civilizations had advanced beyond needing to understand such basic phenomena. By noon, the solar still had produced nearly half a cup of perfectly clean water. The aliens could not believe their eyes. Captain Veltar used his scientific instruments to test the water and confirmed that it was purer than anything their quantum water maker had ever produced. There were no contaminants, no bacteria, no dissolved minerals, just pure H2O. "Human has done something impossible," said Hivenal. His clicking mandibles were trembling with amazement. "He has created water from nothing using only garbage and sunlight." This defies everything we know about technology and engineering, but it was not impossible at all, Taman explained. It was just simple. The same physics that governed their advanced technology also governed his primitive device. The difference was that his device worked with natural forces. Instead of fighting against them, the sun wanted to evaporate water and water vapor wanted to condense when it cooled. All he had done was arrange things so these natural processes would work for them instead of against them. As the afternoon continued, the solar still produced more and more water. The aliens took turns watching the droplets form and fall. Each drop represented hope and life in the face of certain death. They began to understand that their survival depended not on complex technology, but on understanding the simple laws that governed the universe. Captain Veltar knelt beside the device and studied it carefully. Human, he said quietly, I owe you an apology. I have spent my life believing that advanced technology was superior to everything else. But your grandmother wisdom has accomplished what our quantum processors could not. The other aliens nodded in agreement. They were beginning to see that intelligence was not about having the most sophisticated equipment. It was about understanding how to use the resources available to solve problems. Their advanced machines were impressive, but they were useless when they broke down. Taemin, simple solar still would work as long as the sun was shining. By evening, they had collected nearly 2 cups of clean water. It was not enough for everyone, but it proved that the system worked. More importantly, it proved that they could survive. The aliens who had mocked Taemin garbage collection now saw his materials as precious resources that could save their lives. As the twin suns set on their third day, the aliens gathered around Taemin, solar still with new respect in their eyes. They had learned that sometimes the most advanced solution was the simplest one, and that wisdom could be found in the most unexpected places. Tomorrow they would work together to build more solar stills and ensure their survival, but tonight they celebrated the miracle of clean water, falling drop by drop from plastic wrap and sunlight into a simple metal cup. The 4th day began with something that had not happened since the crash. Hope. Captain Veltar woke to find that Taemin Solar still had been working all night. The device had collected dew from the cool desert air and produced another cup of clean water. While they slept, the aliens gathered around the simple contraption with wonder in their eyes. This is remarkable, said Captain Veltar as he examined the solar still carefully. Your device worked even without direct sunlight. It captured moisture from the air itself. How is this possible? The tall blue alien was now speaking to Taemin with respect instead of mockery. Taemin explained how the temperature difference between day and night created condensation. Even in the desert there was always some moisture in the air. The plastic cover cooled down at night and water vapor condensed on its surface, just like dew forming on grass in the morning. It was the same natural process that happened everywhere in the galaxy. The other aliens listened with fascination as Taemin described the simple science behind his device. Kixlock and Hivenau clicked their mandibles. Thoughtfully, they were beginning to understand that their complex education had missed some very important basic knowledge. Gemstone flashed bright blue, which meant he was learning something new and exciting. Can we build more of these devices? Asked Captain Veltar. We have many containers and plastic materials in the ship wreckage. If we can produce enough water, we might survive until rescue comes. His voice was humble, now very different from the arrogant tone he had used before. Taemin nodded and smiled. Of course we can build more. The principle is simple once you understand it. The sun provides energy, water follows the laws of physics, and we just arrange things so nature does the work for us. He began sorting through the ship debris, looking for materials they could use. The aliens eagerly joined him in searching for supplies. They found plastic food containers, metal cups, glass bottles, aluminum sheets, and clear packaging materials. Everything they had previously considered worthless trash was now precious survival equipment. Their perspective had completely changed as they worked together. Taemin taught them the important details. The bottom of each still needed to be dark-colored to absorb heat. The plastic cover had to be completely sealed to trap the water vapor. The collection cup must be positioned exactly at the lowest point. The angle of the plastic was critical for directing water droplets to the right place. Captain Veltar proved to be a quick learner despite his previous arrogance. He helped seal the edges of their second solar still using melted plastic from damaged equipment, his long blue fingers were surprisingly good at delicate work, and he took pride in making each seal perfect. The Zephyrians Kixlock and Hivenal used their natural climbing abilities to position the solar stills in the best locations. They could scale the crashed ship and find spots that would receive sunlight all day long. Their insect-like bodies were perfectly suited for this kind of precise placement. Workhamstone contributed by using his crystal structure to focus sunlight into concentrated beams. He could angle his faceted body to direct extra solar energy onto the stills, making them work more efficiently. His unique abilities turned out to be perfect for improving the simple human design by midday they had built. 5 working solar stills positioned around their crash site. Each device was producing clean water at a steady rate. The aliens watched in amazement as drop after drop of pure water collected in their improvised containers they were witnessing their salvation happening one droplet at a time. "This is better than our quantum water maker," said Hivenal as he watched water dripping steadily from the plastic covers. "Your devices produce purer water and they cannot break down. They need no maintenance. No rare elements, no complex repairs, just sunlight and simple physics." Taemin felt proud, but he also felt sad that it had taken a life-threatening crisis for the aliens to learn these lessons. His grandmother had always said that the most important knowledge was often the simplest, but people tended to forget basic truths when they became too dependent on complex technology. As the day continued, the aliens began sharing stories about their homeworlds. Captain Veltar admitted that most Altarians had never learned basic survival skills. They lived in climate-controlled cities and relied completely on advanced technology for everything. Even their food was produced by molecular assemblers that turned raw elements into perfect meals. The Zephyrians explained that their species had once been desert dwellers like the creatures on this planet, but over thousands of years, they had developed technology that made survival skills unnecessary. Their ancestors had known how to find water in dry places, but that knowledge had been lost when machines took over those functions. Gemstone revealed that his crystal people had originally formed in natural caves where they learned to collect moisture from rock surfaces, but modern silicates were grown in artificial environments where water was provided automatically. They had forgotten the old ways of gathering water from their surroundings. Taemin listened to their stories and realized that this was a common pattern across the galaxy. Advanced civilizations developed amazing technology, but in the process they lost touch with the basic principles that made their technology possible. People became so dependent on machines that they forgot how to solve problems without them. That evening, as they sat around their collection of working solar stills, Captain Veltar made a formal apology. "Human Taemin, I have been foolish and arrogant. I judged your knowledge as primitive. Without understanding its value, you have saved our lives with wisdom that my advanced education never taught me." The other aliens agreed. They had learned more about practical science in one day than in years of formal education. Their schools had taught them about exotic physics and complex engineering, but they had never learned the simple truths that could save their lives in an emergency. Taemin accepted their apologies gracefully, but he pointed out that their advanced knowledge was also valuable. The problem was not that they knew too much complex science, but that they had forgotten the simple science that formed the foundation of everything else. The best approach was to understand both the basic principles and the advanced applications. As night fell, their solar stills continued working. The plastic covers cooled in the desert air and moisture condensed on their surfaces. By morning, they would have enough water for everyone, plus extra to store for emergencies. They had gone from facing death to having a sustainable water supply. In just 2 days, the aliens now looked at Taemin with genuine respect and friendship. They had learned that wisdom could come from unexpected sources and that the most important knowledge was often the simplest. Captain Veltar declared that when they returned to civilization, he would make sure that basic survival skills were taught alongside advanced technology in all schools. That night, under the brilliant alien stars, the crash survivors felt something they had not experienced since landing. Hope. They had water, they had shelter, and most importantly, they had learned to work together, combining their different abilities to solve problems. Their simple solar stills bubbled quietly in the darkness, proof that sometimes the best solutions were the oldest ones. 7 days after the crash, a bright streak appeared in the desert sky. The survivors looked up from their improved camp to see a rescue ship entering the atmosphere. Captain Veltar activated their emergency beacon, and within hours the rescue vessel landed near their crash site, sending up clouds of red sand. The rescue team consisted of 6 beings from different species, led by an experienced Altarian commander named Zordal. They expected to find desperate survivors barely clinging to life. Instead, they discovered a well-organized settlement with multiple water production systems and healthy crew members working calmly in the desert heat. "What is this?" asked Commander Zordal as he examined the solar stills scattered around the camp. "Sight, these devices are producing clean water, but I do not recognize the technology. Where did you acquire such equipment?" The rescue team members gathered around the simple contraptions with curiosity and confusion. Captain Veltar smiled proudly as he explained, "We did not acquire this technology, Commander. We built it ourselves using salvaged materials and the wisdom of our human crew member, Taemin." He gestured toward the modest human who was checking the water levels in each collection container. The rescue team looked skeptical. "A human built these water makers from crash debris? That seems impossible." Commander Zordal examined the solar stills more closely, noting the simple materials and basic construction. "How can such primitive devices produce high-quality drinking water?" Taemin stepped forward and explained the scientific principles behind the solar stills. He described how solar energy drove the evaporation and condensation cycle that purified contaminated water. The rescue team listened with growing amazement as he demonstrated how each component worked together to create a sustainable water source. "This is remarkable," said the rescue team medic. "A crystalline being similar to gemstone. Your water production rate exceeds that of our ship emergency systems, and the purity levels are exceptional. How did you develop this technology so quickly after crashing?" "We did not develop it," explained Captain Veltar. "This knowledge came from Taemin's grandmother, who survived the water wars on Earth. She taught him these techniques when he was a child. We had advanced quantum water makers, but they failed when we needed them most. Only this simple human wisdom saved our lives." The rescue team exchanged glances of surprise and respect. They had all heard stories about human ingenuity, but seeing it in action was different. News of survival techniques that worked better than advanced technology would spread quickly through the galactic community. Commander Zordal requested detailed documentation of the solar still construction. He wanted to file a complete report about the incident for the Galactic Safety Commission. Stories like this were important for improving emergency procedures and training programs across all spacefaring civilizations. Over the next few hours, the rescue team carefully studied each solar still. They took measurements, recorded the materials used, and documented the construction techniques. The simplicity of the design impressed them more than the most complex technology they had ever seen. As they prepared to leave the desert planet, Captain Veltar made an announcement to his crew and the rescue team. "I want everyone to know that we learned something important. Here, advanced technology is wonderful, but it can fail. The simple knowledge that saved us will work anywhere in the galaxy, as long as there is sunlight and water." The rescue ship had advanced recycling systems that could provide unlimited clean water for the journey home, but the crash survivors insisted on bringing their solar stills with them. They had become symbols of the lesson they had learned about combining advanced knowledge with basic wisdom during the voyage back to civilization. Word of their experience spread throughout the ship. The crew members were amazed that simple plastic and metal containers could outperform quantum water processing systems. They asked Taemin to teach them how to build similar devices for emergency situations. Captain Veltar sent messages ahead to the space station describing what had happened. He emphasized that their survival had depended on traditional knowledge rather than advanced technology. The story captured the imagination of engineers and scientists across multiple worlds. When they finally reached Centauri Station, the largest spaceport in that sector of the galaxy, a crowd of reporters and scientists was waiting to greet them. Everyone wanted to hear about the human who had saved his alien crewmates using primitive survival techniques. Story made headlines across the galactic news networks. "Human engineer saves alien crew with grandmother wisdom," read one popular headline. Another proclaimed, "Ancient techniques outperform Quantum technology and desert survival, the incident became famous throughout known space universities. Began requesting interviews with Taemin. Engineering schools wanted to add his survival techniques to their curriculum. Space agencies started reviewing their emergency protocols to see if they should include simple backup systems alongside their advanced equipment. Captain Veltar became one of the most vocal advocates for changing how survival training was conducted. I spent my career believing that the most advanced technology was always the best solution, he told reporters, but I learned that wisdom is not about having the most complex equipment, it is about understanding the principles that make any solution work. The other survivors also became spokesmen for the importance of basic knowledge. Kixlock and Hive now returned to their homeworld and established a school that taught both advanced engineering and traditional survival skills. Gemstone began studying the old ways his crystal ancestors had used to gather water within months. The Galactic Engineering Council had established new requirements for all space travelers. Every crew member would be required to learn basic survival techniques from at least 3 different worlds. Emergency kits would include simple, reliable backup systems that could work without power or complex components. The incident report became required reading at space academies throughout the galaxy. Students learned about the importance of understanding fundamental principles, not just memorizing how to operate advanced equipment. The story of the solar stills became a classic example of how simple solutions could be more reliable than complex ones. Taemin found himself invited to speak at conferences and symposiums across known space, but he always gave credit to his grandmother and the generations of humans who had developed these survival techniques through necessity. He explained that every species had similar traditional knowledge that had been forgotten as technology advanced. The solar stills from the desert planet were eventually displayed in the Galactic Museum of Science and Technology, with a plaque explaining how they had saved the lives of 8 beings. The exhibit became one of the most popular displays, showing visitors that the most important innovations were often the simplest ones. Years later, when spacers faced emergencies in remote locations, they would remember the story of Taemin and his solar stills. The techniques he had demonstrated spread throughout the galaxy, saving countless lives and proving that sometimes the oldest knowledge was the most valuable knowledge of all. 2 years after the desert planet rescue, Taemin received an invitation that changed his life. The Galactic Engineering Council wanted him to speak at their annual symposium on Centauri Prime. The event would be attended by the most brilliant minds from hundreds of worlds, beings whose technology could reshape planets and manipulate the fabric of space itself. Taemin felt nervous as he prepared for the presentation. He was just a simple engineer who had remembered his grandmother lessons, but now he was being asked to address the greatest scientists in the galaxy. The auditorium would hold 10,000 beings who had spent their lives mastering the most complex theories in physics and engineering. When the day arrived, Taemin walked onto the stage carrying a simple bag that looked very much like the one he had brought to the desert planet. Inside were the same types of materials: plastic containers, metal cups, wire, and rubber tubing. The audience murmured with curiosity as he set these ordinary items on the presentation table. Distinguished colleagues, he began, his voice carrying clearly through the vast auditorium. I stand before you not as a great scientist or advanced engineer, but as someone who learned that the universe speaks to us in simple language if we know how to listen. My grandmother taught me that the most elegant solutions are often the most basic ones. He told the story of their crash on the desert planet, describing how their advanced quantum technology had failed while simple physics had saved their lives. The audience listened intently as he explained how evaporation and condensation had worked together to produce clean water from contaminated sources. But this is not just a story about water production. Taemin continued, it is about remembering that all of our advanced technology is built on fundamental principles that never change. We can manipulate quantum fields and bend space-time, but we must never forget that heat still makes water evaporate and cooling still makes vapor condense. The presentation sparked intense discussion throughout the scientific community. Some older scientists nodded in agreement, remembering their own encounters with situations where simple solutions had worked better than complex ones. Younger researchers were fascinated by the idea that basic physics could be more reliable than their sophisticated equipment. Within weeks of the symposium, a revolution began in engineering philosophy across the galaxy. Space agencies started requiring all crew members to learn traditional survival techniques from multiple worlds. Universities began teaching courses that combined advanced theory with practical applications that required no technology. The changes went far beyond just emergency preparedness. Engineers began designing backup systems that could work without power or computer control. Architects started incorporating natural processes into their building designs. Manufacturers created products that would function even if their electronic components failed. Taminen became the director of a new institution called the Galactic Institute for Practical Solutions. The facility was built on a beautiful world with diverse climates where beings from across the galaxy could learn survival and engineering techniques from hundreds of different cultures. Students came from every advanced civilization to study at the institute. They learned how desert peoples found water, how Arctic dwellers stayed warm, how island cultures navigated by stars, how forest tribes made tools from natural materials. Every traditional technique was studied and understood in scientific terms. Captain Veltar became one of the institute's first instructors. The former arrogant Altarian had become humble and wise through his desert experience. He taught courses on the importance of understanding basic principles before attempting advanced applications. His classes were always full of eager students. Lock and Hive now established a branch campus on their home world where they taught Zephyrian survival techniques that had been forgotten for centuries. They showed students how their ancestors had found food and water in harsh environments using nothing but observation and ingenuity. Stone created a crystalline laboratory where students could learn how his people had originally formed in natural caves. The facility demonstrated how crystal beings could gather water from rock surfaces and how they had developed their early civilization by working with natural geological processes. The institute became famous throughout the galaxy for producing engineers who could solve problems with any available resources. Students learned to think creatively and understand the fundamental forces that governed all technology. They graduated with both advanced degrees and practical skills that could save lives. The museum at the institute displayed traditional tools and techniques from thousands of worlds alongside explanations of the scientific principles they employed. Visitors could see how similar problems had been solved differently by various species, but always using the same basic laws of physics. Stamen bag of simple materials was exhibited in a place of honor with a sign that read advanced technology should enhance wisdom, not replace it. The display became a symbol of the Institute's philosophy that true intelligence meant understanding both complex theory and simple practice. Years passed, and the Institute's influence spread throughout galactic civilization. Emergency protocols were rewritten to include simple backup procedures. Engineering education was reformed to emphasize fundamental principles. Manufacturers designed products that could be repaired with basic tools and materials. The Institute graduated thousands of students who returned to their home worlds with new appreciation for traditional knowledge. They became teachers and designers and problem solvers who could work effectively whether they had access to advanced technology or not. Space exploration became safer as crews learned to survive in any environment using local resources. Colony ships carried both quantum processors and simple tools, ensuring that settlements could thrive even if their technology failed. Medical ships included traditional healing techniques alongside advanced treatment. Stamen often walked through the institute grounds thinking about his grandmother. She had passed down knowledge that had survived wars and disasters and the rise and fall of civilizations. Now that knowledge was helping beings across the galaxy live better lives. The simple solar still design became standard equipment on all spacecraft adapted for different environments and available materials. The technique saved thousands of lives over the years, proving that basic human ingenuity could benefit every species in the galaxy. Students at the Institute learned a motto that became famous throughout known space: the universe follows simple rules no matter how complex our technology becomes. When we understand those rules, we can solve any problem with any materials. The wisdom of our ancestors combined with modern Knowledge creates solutions that work everywhere in his final years. Taemin would sit in his office watching students from dozens of worlds working together to solve practical problems. They used both quantum computers and hand tools, electronic sensors, and careful observation, advanced materials, and salvaged components. He knew that his grandmother would have been proud to see her simple lessons helping beings she could never have imagined on worlds she could never have visited. The water cycle that she had taught him with a metal pot and piece of glass was now saving lives throughout the galaxy. The legacy of the desert planet incident lived on in every emergency kit that included simple backup tools in every engineering course that taught fundamental principles alongside advanced theory in every problem solved by understanding basic physics rather than complex technology. Taemin had learned that true progress came not from abandoning old knowledge but from combining traditional wisdom with modern capabilities. The most advanced civilizations were those that remembered their roots while reaching for the stars, understanding that the universe revealed its secrets to those humble enough to listen to simple truths.